Hi, everyone. Today I'd like to introduce Dr. Rufus Mitchell-Heggs. He is the Chief Science Officer of Connectome Health and holds an MSc in Neurotechnology from Imperial College London and a PhD in Computational Neuroscience from a joint program between Imperial College London and the University of Edinburgh. So Rufus, can you tell us your story? I'd love to hear just a bit more about your background and your journey to get to where you are today.
Yes, as well. So on a short scale, I became very interested in neuroscience when I was doing my undergrad and as a bachelor's, and in particular, I was very connected to it from a personal perspective. My dad had a stroke when I was 11 years old, and so I grew up often around neurologists and understanding what is the impact of a neurological disease or disorder on the brain. And so I spent a lot of my life surrounded by that. And then when I did my undergrad in biochemistry, science was my real draw. So I ended up specializing, and I did a master's in neurotechnology at Imperial. And during that master's, I really developed a focus on memory and cognition. And in the first instance, my focus was essentially in animal models, so the real mechanisms of what makes up these different areas. And I found that absolutely fascinating, how we can actually describe what a memory is and break it down in terms of being episodic or semantic and the different forms of memory, but also how we can actually get into it. And I think I just found it absolutely fascinating that we were describing these previously deeply philosophical terms using science, using maths, and showing them on a graph, and then creating the story, the updated story that will be that little part of that little bit on the shoulder of giants, as you could say. So my interest started in that sense, and as I reached the end of my PhD, which investigated this further, I started stepping back and thinking, okay, what next? And I had opportunities to sort of double down and go further into that space. But what I became increasingly interested in was connecting what I'm doing with real world consequence. And I think that was something which I was feeling throughout the PhD, and I really wanted to act on it. And so as I came out of the PhD, I came across Connectome. So this is not immediately after, but after almost a year of searching as to what's next. And I came across Connectome. It's a startup that was based in Zurich, and I was interested in moving to Zurich. And I really liked the vision of the founder, Lucas Scherdel, who's now my co-founder. And that vision was essentially, how can we take the latest insights from the neuroscientific community across the different research fields and translate them into something which can become useful for everyday people, direct to consumer.
So let's double click into that. Can you dive in a little bit further upon, maybe the founding story of Connectome Health and what inspired you to team up with Lucas and help build this company here?
As with many things, it starts with a problem. So, talking from Lucas's side, he was previously a VP at Bayer, and he'd been working a lot in the space of mental health and also, again, translation of services into real life world. And through conducting huge amounts of volumetric studies, he really started to get a feel for quite how interested the world was in a neuroscience offering. People want to know about their brains, and they don't want to just have proxies of their brains like you get with a wearable or with cognitive testing. They want a physiological biomarker that they can look at within their brain that tells them something about their performance. And so Lucas very much started these volumetric studies and was actually surprised that no one was doing anything about it. And so that's how things got started. He founded Connectome, and he started asking specifically, what are people interested in, and taking a market agnostic approach into how you would solve this problem. And I think that's something very original that we've tried to do as a company, is say, okay, we've got access to any tool in the world, any neurotech tool, which one would we use and why? And the first thing that comes to mind is, if we want something that's going to help the many, it's got to be scalable, it's got to be portable, it's got to be easy to use, it's got to be something that is easy to train a technician with. And so that's why we actually got a demo here. That's why we came across kernel as an fNIRS system. Is specifically for its scalability as a system. And then the next question after that becomes, okay, how can you take the next step with the biomarkers that we can find using fNIRS. What's available out there, and how can we translate it into a product? And so that's at the stage at which I joined, and essentially the part that my main focus was saying, what are we going to track in the brain using this technology? What is the best possible methodology that we can take out and apply? And really happy with the results. So I ended up working with a cognitive neuroscientist at Imperial College called Matteo Vino-Carl, who's been doing some absolutely spectacular work on dynamic propagation patterns across the cortex of the brain, the upper surface of the brain. So our science is based in real world scientific breakthroughs. And we're just fortunate enough to be at that place in that environment where we can access it quickly and then apply it into a commercial product. And that's essentially what I've been working on the past 6 or so months, is the application of this, along with Matteo Vino-Carl, the genius behind it, and with Lucas to get it into a commercial setting.
Thanks for sharing some of the background there. And just to stay on kind of like the company side of things a little bit longer, we'll definitely pivot over into things like technology and science and user experience soon. But another quick question about the company. So the name Connectome refers to generally a comprehensive map of neural connections in the brain. And so I was wondering what inspired this name for the company?
So what we're interested in is less the structure of the brain and more the function of the brain. So it's how, on on a small scale, how neurons are interacting, and we can't quite get at that yet. But Connectome also refers to the larger scale interactions across the brain. So what we're interested in is how these different brain regions are interacting with one another, not statically but dynamically. And that's a little bit of the inspiration behind the name, is we're interested in this dynamic relation between brain regions. And what's important about that is the dynamism of it is actually linked to the structure of the brain. So you can start getting at different biomarkers linked to things like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's based on your ability to predict structure from the function. But then also importantly, we can track things like memory and focus or attention based on the dynamic capabilities of our software. I'd also just add, by the way, something which we've discovered since launching is that a lot of people who are new to neuroscience, they don't think of it as Connectome at all, but they think of it as Connect to Me, which is it's not something that we were necessarily planning on as a thought, but actually it makes a lot of sense, because that's exactly what we're helping people do, is take a look into their brain and actually connect to themselves.
Yeah, understood. And now to pivot into the technology side of things. So I think you mentioned earlier that the modality that you guys are using is fNIRS. And so I was wondering if you could explain to any of our listeners who might not be super familiar with that technology, could you give us an overview of fNIRS and then maybe dive into a little bit more detail as to like how Connectome plans to use it to monitor brain activity and some of these biomarkers you were mentioning, as well as presumably changes over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd just preface by saying that the technology that we're using can be used across devices. It's been tested in EEG and MEG, so it can be used across different areas. We focused on fNIRS due to its scalability, affordability, and essentially its readiness, market readiness. fNIRS as a technology essentially has an array of different optrodes on the inside. They're essentially small lasers, not too dissimilar to what you would have on an Apple Watch, which project light down into the top surface of the brain. And then the light gets absorbed by different tissues in your brain, such as your blood, and then reflects a different wavelength back up into the helmet. And then you can essentially pick up where there is blood flow in the brain. So essentially, we're monitoring where blood is flowing in the cortex, the top surface of the brain over time, so dynamically. And it's through tracking where blood is at different moments in time that we can start building a relationship with how a person is thinking, because blood and neural activity are linked together through a process called hemodynamic coupling, which essentially means that the more active your neurons are, the more resources they're using up, and therefore the more blood that it recruits to that specific area to replenish the resources of that area. And so essentially, we're measuring how you're thinking by looking at where blood is in the top surface of your brain and then characterizing that.
And so, based on our discussion so far, it seems like the key value proposition from Connectome is more so like the algorithms and the tracking and the biomarkers that you guys are obtaining from these biosignals. And so, another quick question regarding technology is what hardware do you guys use? I think you had briefly mentioned Kernel's product before. Is there any additional hardware that you and the team use?
Yeah, at the moment we're working with Kernel, and we've enjoyed working with Kernel on that. But the reason that we've chosen Kernel, and they've chosen us in return. But the main reason we wanted to work with Kernel was because of their test-retest reliability. They've got some great research showing that when they look across different days or different sessions, that they're getting very similar results. And I think they've got 0.88 test-retest reliability, which is it's between that level of well into the consumer wellness level, so we can give insights about a brain, and it's just teetering on diagnostic capability, which is a very exciting position. And I know that Kernel is doing some work in the clinical space as well.
Yeah, that makes sense that that would be, an important metric or an important parameter to keep your eye on and try to have optimized. And then to the level of detail that you're able to share, what are the key metrics that you guys are tracking and how are you tracking them?
Yeah, so Connectome, I would say, is on a journey. So in the first instance, we'll be collecting metrics that are consumer wellness focused. And so we will at no point be able to diagnose an individual with anything, but what we will be able to do is help them get an understanding of specific metrics of their brain's performance. And so the main thing that we're looking at the moment is sustained attention. And this is essentially a fundamental building block of thinking. And so our ability to monitor how your attention is changing over the course of different cognitive tests enables us to build a really strong picture of when your brain is fatiguing and what might be the underlying reasons for fatigue as well. That's where we link in a multimodal nature. So looking at things like lifestyle factors. So that might be using wearable information or survey information. So sustained attention is our kind of absolute core. And this we can essentially look at over multiple different areas. The other thing we're looking at is memory. So essentially how these biomarkers are affected during memory tasks. And so we can start seeing, is there anything specific about your memory which might be different to the rest of the populations? And then finally, we're looking at fatigue rates. And so this is, as you complete tasks, how are you replenishing? How well are you recovering from different tasks? All of these metrics are heavily researched in neuroscience. And whilst we've got a biomarker that looks at it in a new way, they're actually reported in a lot of different spaces, and they're very linked to things like ADHD or to anxiety disorders, mild cognitive impairment. So whilst we're not giving diagnoses of these things, what we are looking to do in the near future is build big enough data sets so that we can start doing that. And this gets over the problem of noisy data, is that if we have enough of it, then we can really start doing meaningful things with it. Big objective of what we're doing and why we're doing direct to consumer as well. It's to build that giant corpus of data. And I'd say it plainly, we want to be the biggest brain data set that is out there.
Understood. Yeah, thanks for explaining those various metrics you guys are looking at, as well as your strategy behind why the company decided to start as going direct to consumer. And could you double click a little bit further on some of the scientific validity behind these metrics that you're tracking, and maybe some research that either Connectome or others have done that, the listeners can double click into if they want to explore the scientific side of this a bit further?
Okay, so the main thing that our science is backed on is currently being submitted to Nature Neuroscience. So we don't have a link currently available for it. It's a very novel technique is all I can say, that is characterizing dynamical blood flow within the brain. And so it's taking things a step further than previous functional connectivity analyses. The next thing I'd say is that what we've done is taken some of this research and seen how does it look like compared to what else is out there in the literature. And so what I can do is signpost a few different papers that we've looked into, which essentially looks at a similar sort of thing as the default mode network versus task positive network. And this is something which previously people could get at with fMRI. And you could get quite good relationships between the two, essentially your brain at rest and your brain during a task, and what is the difference. And so this is essentially what we're getting at, and I'll signpost an interesting paper in that space.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for sharing that detail there, and I'll be sure to link whatever you send in the show notes. And then you had mentioned part of the long-term vision for Connectome is to potentially start transitioning some of these analyses or some of this biomarker tracking over into the clinical space. And if you're open to talking about the strategy there, I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about the path between where you guys are right now to how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So our main focus at this first instance is direct to consumer, and we want to essentially build this ginormous data set. And the reason for that is because we understand that neuroscience is very nuanced. Each brain works ever so slightly differently. And then if we're essentially looking across individuals, we want to start finding out what are those nuances. And so it's a case of really describing the population and finding what are the main clusters that people fall within, and how does that progress over time. And so by building that longitudinal large data set, what we hope to do is look into, first of all, prevention. By tracking enough people over time and seeing how their brains change, can we start identifying patterns linked with neurological disease or disorder? We won't just be recruiting this through our direct-to-consumer business, but also running studies alongside the business. So we've already partnered with Imperial College and the University of Zurich on various studies. And so essentially, this is to kind of get into that question further. How do people with neurological diseases and disorders differ from a healthy and nicely described nuanced population? And so how does that differ? Which cluster do they fall into? And how does someone move from one healthy cluster into an unhealthy neurological disease or disorder cluster? So that's essentially a little bit what we want to build as a model. In terms of how we're going there, the first step is, as I said, direct to consumer. So introducing clinics and a franchise model where individuals can access the Connectome device and run it within their healthcare or longevity clinic. And then as we move into the clinical biomarker sector, that would be essentially running 2 to 3 year long clinical studies, seeing how it compares to healthy populations, getting class 2 medical device authorization as well, and essentially doing everything by the book to make sure that we're never telling somebody about their brain something that we're not absolutely sure about, that there's something to do about it, and that it's passed all regulatory bodies.
Understood. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And now to backpedal a little bit and to talk about that direct to consumer aspect and that user experience. Pretend that I am a consumer or a user who has booked a scan with Connectome or maybe one of these franchises that you mentioned. Can you walk me through the process of what that looks like for the consumer? So what will my experience look like? And assuming I don't know a ton about neuroscience, like walking into this, what new information will I obtain as a consumer?
Connectome is essentially managed through a digital platform where essentially you can book in a scan and fill out a few different informations, which I'll loop back to in a moment. So we start with the Connectome scan. So if you were an individual wanting and interested, you would first of all come in, you would get your brain scanned using our fNIRS device whilst completing a series of cognitive tasks and also some rest states. So that's what we would use to build your brain model, or we call it your neural digital fingerprint. Then at the end of your service, we would essentially provide you all of your information on a dashboard within the digital platform. So you can see your data directly, you can interact with it, you can see the different metrics that we've extracted for things like attention, memory, fatigue, and what they mean to you. But importantly, we've got to go further than just giving people another wearable reporting. The so what is so important over here. And it's not just about telling you something about your brain and then leaving you wondering what that means. It's about how do you action on that information. So Connectome is essentially building a protocol generator as well. So once you've received your results, you would be able to sit down and talk to and have a consultation with an expert, and they would essentially bring out factors from your life that are influencing your brain activity to help you understand which of these factors might be having the greatest impact on your brain activity. And then through an agreement and a consultation with you, you would identify which one's the most high priority, what is your motivation to actually work with that as a specific protocol, and then you would run that protocol and then track how that is affecting your brain state 3 months later, 3 months later after that. So you've got a constant idea of how things are changing over time and how that protocol is affecting your brain.
Sure. And then who is giving these consultations to the users? Is it somebody from the Connectome team? Is it a clinician or something? I was wondering if you could share a bit more information on that.
Yeah, at the moment we're working with a medical doctor who's essentially we've got an automated protocol generator, and they're the clinician in the loop, so they're essentially adding guardrails to make sure that we're doing everything within the realms of providing people positive protocols that have been checked, and essentially making sure that there's that expert medical opinion in the room. And all too difficult with medical software companies that are popping up is that Hippocratic oath. So by having a trained doctor, we always make sure that we've got someone that's gone through the right processes for confidentiality of an individual's information.
And then to double click a little bit further on the users. So what specific problem does this help solve for the users? If I'm a potential user, I'm thinking about booking like a consultation or a scan, what can I expect to be solved or improved for me, like walking out of that scan or working with the company or the team?
This is a great question, and it's one that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Connectome. And I basically point out two different populations of people that have slightly connected problems, but that they're important to look at with a fine tooth comb, essentially. The first population is people who are essentially wanting to prevent age-related cognitive decline and slow it as much as possible, and find ways in which you can prevent having neurological disorders later in life, like dementia or whatnot. So this is, people who are kind of getting over the age of 50 who might start thinking about this specific topic. And the important thing to note here is that there is currently no gold standard neurological biomarker that people can look at. There's very little information. Everybody's telling you that you should prevent this from happening. There's very unorganized protocols that are out there. And this just leaves people feeling absolutely frustrated, hopeless, helpless. They have no idea what to do about it. They have no idea what in their life is actually causing their age-related cognitive decline, and there's nothing out there to help them. So it's a very frustrating feeling for a lot of people, knowing you should be doing something about it, but not being able to do something about it. So Connectome caters for that population. First of all, by saying what in your life is the most important impactor on age-related cognitive decline. And it's important to sort of take an opportunity here, and I'd signpost it. There's a great paper out by the Lancet showing that there's 14 modifiable factors for dementia, and that over 45% of dementia cases can be prevented. Huge amount of dementia cases that can be prevented in that instance. And we want to help people essentially understand what might be having an impact on that. So that's the first population. And then the second population is essentially people before the age of 50. And this might also branch into people over 50 as well. But it's people that are saying, okay, I'm working in a high-paced job, or doesn't matter what it is, but they essentially want to improve their mental performance. They could be people experiencing brain fog, people experiencing burnout, essentially not operating as they would like to, and they want to optimize their brains and how they can do something about that as well. And again, I'd point out that there's just nothing out there that helps people with this. Wearables are trying to do it, but they're just proxies, and they give people more of an indicator of how their body is feeling rather than their mind is feeling. So we really want to help those people to relieve that frustration that there is something that you can do to optimize your brain health.
And one more quick question about the user side of things. So where would be the types of locations that they would potentially walk into to get this scan? Would this be clinician's office, a direct-to-consumer service kind of offered in partnership with the clinician, or would it be more like a fitness or wellness or yoga type of studio? Where would be the types of locations that consumers could get this scan?
Yeah, in the first instance, we're opening up flagship centers. So Connectome managed in London and in Zurich. So there would essentially be a growth model which would aim to hit specific target markets and cities. But then we're also looking at franchise, and it kind of gets at what you were saying there. And we're very interested in the wellness market with our first product. And so that would essentially be working with the likes of longevity clinics and fitness clinics. And so these would be operating out of different cities and different towns as well. So we'd look to connect with them and provide them an affordable brain offering.
Let's get into the current state and future vision of Connectome Health. So, what's the current state of Connectome Health and its product or service offerings? It looks like you guys might be in kind of like the pre-order stage and ramping up to that initial release.
Yeah, that's right. We're pre-order, we're pre-seed. So we're actually fundraising at the moment, and we're going to be closing in May. So we're running a big fundraising round at the moment for our pre-seed funding. Then it's a case of building up to our launch in July. So we're essentially fundraising, and then using fundraising, we'll use that to launch in London and in Zurich. We're also actually running a study with Imperial College at the moment, where we're gaining sort of early user insights into what would be the best possible connection between their brain state and lifestyle. How can we find that out? So we're recruiting for that at the moment in London, and looking to get some early insights there. And then it's, as you said, we're building a wait list. We want to be essentially in every big city when we can. So that's the aim.
Well, exciting times ahead, and good luck with the launch as well as the study that you and the team are working on. And so now let's zoom out a little bit and look at the vision for Connectome Health over the long term. What do you see as the overall vision for what your company hopes to accomplish over the long term, and what you think things might look like many years from now?
Yeah, so Connectome, it's a journey in itself, and we have multiple stages that we've mapped out, and there's so far that we can go, and it's essentially constantly evolving with the field of neurotechnology as well. And so from the start, we've built a device agnostic company, so we can work with essentially the latest neurotechnological device that's out there. And as that improves, we'll look to partner so that we're giving more and more accurate and reliable scans as we go. I think what we've got at the moment is a great starting point, and as the field develops, we will look to develop with it. And so that's the first stage. And as our user base grows and we're able to build this nuanced picture of life and brain, what we're looking forward to is being able to actually really suggest protocols that have maximum efficacy for specific individuals. So diving into this idea of personalization, this is an absolute key thing for anyone that's optimizing their brain, is that it's not just a generic protocol, it's something which is personalized to them, and we have a feeling that this will work well for that person. The more data we collect, the more we'll be able to personalize individuals' protocol journeys, and create something truly, truly meaningful for them. Then there's also the clinical stage. As we work with people over their lives with Connectome, it's about understanding these trajectories that people are on, and again, getting a nuanced feel for those trajectories. And what that's going to help us do is identify more quickly when a person, not when they've got Alzheimer's disease or a specific disease, but when they're on a trajectory towards one, so that you can prevent it faster. And so that's essentially what we're interested in there, is the prevention stage, before someone's got a neurological disease and disorder. And then, as I said before, linking them with the best protocol can help them regain control of their age trajectory of their brain and their trajectory. So that's a little bit the idea, is understanding the nuance, understanding the trajectories, and then forming clinical biomarkers that we can use to support not just individuals, but clinicians with their decision making, and then really building a strong, curated database of protocols that work for people.
Thanks for sharing that vision with us. What advice would you give to students or maybe young professionals who are interested in this field and are aiming to work in it, in neuroscience or neurotechnology?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would say is apply yourselves, find a problem, stick to it. I think that's absolutely important, is to find something that you're passionate to solve. And so that's the first thing. And sometimes it's a case of really searching as well for that specific problem. The journey doesn't stop when you're getting into a PhD lab and working with a professor. It's a case of within that lab finding out what is the thing that is interesting to you, and then also being bold, being unafraid to say this is what I'm interested in doing. And I think that's a very important thing. And for a lot of researchers, it can be very difficult and very daunting to stand up to your boss essentially and say, I want to do something very unique. But by doing that, you'll find that there's a huge passion behind that, and you're nurturing that internal thinking of driving your own passion, which I think is crucial.
Yeah, I think those are good tips. Do you have any predictions for the field of neurotechnology over the long term, perhaps the next 20 years or so?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say the next 10 years is foundation building. The neurotechnology landscape has never been more fertile. Looking across the US, all the way to Europe as well, there's been an enormous amount of investment. I think I saw that it's gone from the hundreds of millions in 2024 to 3.2 billion by 2030 is estimated. So there's a huge increase in funding that's going to be linked to neurotech. And in the first instance, it's foundation. It takes a long time to get anything through clinical trials, 2 to 3 years for different clinical trials. And most of neurotech is actually still hiding in preclinical stages. We're not going to see anything massive in the next 10 years, is my prediction. But what we are going to see is some amazing technologies making their debut. The next 10 years after that is scaling it. It's a case of getting these neurotechnologies into people's lives into meaningful ways. And I think that's going to be a case where we're going to have more accessibility of these devices. It's not just going to be in the hands of the few. It's going to be in the hands of the many for medical and consumer situation. And through that, we're going to have more and more neurological data. It's going to become more centralized so that we can have better models that are better predictors. And I think that's going to be an exciting point where we really start getting at neurological diseases and disorders. And I think companies like Connectome, we're data aggregators, and that's part of what we do, as well as offering a consumer offering. And we want to be part of that. That's what we're trying to build, is that future where we can actually get at that. The one thing that I haven't mentioned is AI. It's a bit of an unknown variable, but what I can say is how we've been working with it is it's something that can work with individuals to support protocols, to help bring in their brain data, bring in their wearable life and different questionnaires data, to aggregate everything together into a meaningful way. So I predict there's going to be a lot of exciting works in AI clinicians, and I think that's going to be a space to watch as they work with real life doctors to support their lives. But essentially, it all leads to individualization, people managing their own healthcare and being able to do that more efficiently themselves.
Sounds like exciting times ahead. So, do you have a book or media recommendation for our listeners? And this could be neuroscience related, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yes. So I think there's a few suggestions that I had, and there may be good introductions into neuroscience. I think, well known in the US is Andrew Huberman, his podcast. Not necessarily a book, but I think he's someone that's very topical and great in terms of understanding the underlying neuroscience and different protocols as well, things that can help enhance your brain. So I think he's definitely a very interesting character. I then also mentioned a few people that I found their works really interesting. So there was Anil Seth, who wrote a great book called Being You. It's about consciousness, and it's one of the books that actually got me into neuroscience and got me really interested in academia as well. I then say there's The Spike by Mark Humphries. Again, walks through a wonderful journey of how we see the world. And I think Mark Humphries is also a really interesting futurist. I think he's got some great works on in neuroscience and also in sort of predicting what the future of that is. Be a great guest on a podcast. So those are the neuroscience books I'd recommend. And then I'd also just say that neuroscience is a difficult field. It's complex problems. It's very interdisciplinary, but more than anything, it's something that you've got to be persistent at. So a great book that I love is The Old Man and the Sea. It's a great book on resilience, and I think that sometimes it's about drawing parallels with difficult situations in life and finding ways to push through them and to stay positive and to actually deliver and achieve something.
Great recommendations. I don't think I've read those two neuroscience books that you mentioned. I'll be sure to add them to my reading list. And as we move towards the conclusion of the episode here, is there anything else we haven't discussed that you'd like to mention or bring up at this point?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd say then is that Connectome is not working in isolation. Essentially, we want to be working with and within the neuroscience ecosystem, being challenged by different neuroscientists and experts in the field, as well as understanding real user problems. What I would just say is that we're always interested to talk to other people. We're always interested to collaborate, and we're always interested to sort of understand further what people are doing in this space and how a protocol recommendation neurotech company can work with them as well. So I just signpost that.